Incredible Horse Rescue. Royal Guard's unforgettable act of heroism. The air smelled of fresh hay and the faint scent of horses, a smell that Captain Edward Hawthorne had grown to love over the years. He walked slowly along the cobbled path, his polished boots making soft echoes with every step. Though he was a royal guard, a man sworn to protect the family and the estate, his heart had a special place for the animals that lived there. For him, the horses were more than just animals. They were companions, majestic creatures that carried both pride and trust in their eyes. Edward had worked at the estate for many years. He was known for his unwavering loyalty, his sharp attention to detail, and his calm nature in moments of stress. The royal family trusted him, but it was the animals, especially the horses, that had earned his quiet affection. Each morning, he would make his rounds at the stables, checking on the horses one by one, greeting them by name, and sometimes speaking to them as if they could understand every word. To Edward, their gentle eyes and strong, rhythmic breathing were comforting, a steady presence in a life filled with duty and responsibility. The stables themselves were impressive. Built of dark, polished wood, they stood tall against the backdrop of the sprawling estate. Each stall was clean and well-maintained, the floors swept daily and the water troughs always filled with fresh, cool water. The horses were groomed meticulously, their coats shining like silk in the sunlight. Some were young, playful, and full of energy, while others were older, carrying a quiet dignity and grace. Among them was Valor, a magnificent stallion whose black coat glimmered and whose strong muscles rippled with every movement. Valor was known not only for his beauty but also for his intelligence and his spirited nature. Many guards had tried to approach him with authority, but only Edward had earned his trust. There was a special bond between them, an understanding that went beyond words. Edward approached Valor's stall and the horse lifted his head, nostrils flaring slightly, recognizing the familiar figure. "Good morning, Valor," Edward said softly, brushing the stallion's sleek coat with practiced hands. The horse nickered, leaning into the touch, a sign of trust and affection. It was a simple moment, yet it spoke volumes about the relationship between the two. While Edward ensured that Valor was healthy, checking his hooves and making sure his feed was fresh, he also took time to speak to him, telling him about the day ahead, as if preparing him for the world outside the stable. The other guards and stable hands moved around with purpose, carrying buckets of feed, gathering hay, and cleaning stalls. Their work was efficient, almost automatic, but Edward's attention to the details set him apart. He noticed a small cut on a young mare's leg and treated it with gentle care. He adjusted the blanket of an older horse who seemed uncomfortable. These small acts of care were routine for Edward, yet they revealed his deep commitment. To him, every animal deserved patience, respect, and attention. His colleagues often admired him for this quality, though they sometimes teased him for talking to the horses as if they were people. Edward never minded. He believed that trust, once earned, could create unbreakable bonds. As the morning progressed, the estate slowly came alive. Servants carried trays of food to the royal family, gardeners trimmed the hedges, and birds chirped merrily in the trees. The sound of hooves echoed as horses were exercised in the paddocks, galloping gracefully under the watchful eyes of their riders. Edward took a moment to watch them, standing quietly near the fence, appreciating the energy and freedom in their movements. It reminded him why he loved this place so much, the harmony between nature, animals, and human care. Edward's routine was interrupted briefly when a young stable boy ran up to him, looking worried. "Captain Hawthorne," the boy said, "I think Valor is restless today. He keeps pacing and stamping his hooves." Edward nodded, his brow furrowing slightly. Valor had always been a spirited horse, but today there seemed to be more tension in his movements. Edward walked over to the stall and observed him carefully. The stallion's ears were pricked, eyes wide and tail flicking nervously. Something in the air seemed to unsettle him, though Edward could not yet tell what. Despite this, Edward remained calm. He had learned over the years that horses could sense anxiety and fear, and they often mirrored it. His own steady presence could help them remain calm. Kneeling beside Valor, he spoke in soft tones, rubbing the stallion's neck and running his hand along his powerful shoulders. "It's all right, old friend," he murmured. "We'll face this day together." Valor's breathing slowly steadied, though a tension lingered, subtle yet undeniable. Edward knew instinctively that the horse was aware of something beyond the ordinary, something that might disrupt the peaceful rhythm of the morning. After tending to Valor, Edward moved through the stables, checking on the other horses. He greeted each one by name, observing their behavior, listening for subtle signs of discomfort or fear. It was a task that required patience and attentiveness, but Edward found it rewarding. Each animal was unique, and understanding them required time and care. The relationships he had built with them were the result of years of consistency, trust, and respect. And while he loved his duties as a royal guard, it was these quiet moments in the stables that brought him the deepest satisfaction. By late morning, the estate was fully awake, and the rhythm of life continued. Edward took a brief pause, leaning against the stable wall, watching as sunlight danced through the wooden beams. He reflected on his years at the estate, the challenges, the responsibilities, and the small victories that often went unnoticed. He thought of the royal family, whose safety he was sworn to protect, and of the animals whose lives depended on his vigilance and care. For Edward, there was no distinction between these duties. Protecting the horses and ensuring the estate's peace were equally important, woven together into a single purpose. As the day continued, Edward felt a strange unease, subtle yet persistent. Valor's earlier restlessness lingered in his mind. Edward trusted his instincts, honed over years of observing animals and situations, and he sensed that something unusual might occur. Though he could not see the problem, his awareness made him more vigilant. He adjusted his routine slightly, ensuring that Valor and the other horses were secure and calm. He checked the gates, the stall doors, and even the surrounding terrain, his careful eyes scanning for any potential danger. It was a precaution, but one that reflected his dedication. By noon, the sun was high, casting bright light across the estate. Edward completed his rounds, giving Valor one last reassuring pat before leaving him to rest in his stall. The horse nuzzled him gently, a silent sign of trust and affection. Edward smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that came from a sense of duty fulfilled and a bond strengthened. As he walked away, he couldn't have known that the calm of this morning was only the beginning, that soon he would face a challenge unlike any he had encountered before, a moment that would test his courage, his skills, and the extraordinary connection he shared with the animals he loved. The peaceful morning, filled with sunlight, gentle voices, and the quiet rhythm of horse hooves, set the stage for an adventure that would soon unfold. Edward Hawthorne, loyal, observant, and compassionate, had no inkling that this day would demand the very best of him, pushing him into a situation where his bravery and love for the horses would be tested to the limit. Yet in the calm before the storm, he moved through the stables with steady purpose, his presence a reassuring constant for every creature under his care. The day began like any other at the royal estate, but the peace of the morning soon gave way to a sense of urgency that Edward could feel in the air. While making his rounds, he noticed Valor, the stallion he had cared for so diligently, acting differently than usual. The horse paced restlessly, stamping his hooves against the stable floor, and his large, dark eyes darted nervously from one corner to another. It was not unusual for horses to get skittish, but there was something different about this. Edward's instincts told him that the stallion was sensing something he couldn't yet see, a hidden danger waiting to unfold. Edward approached Valor cautiously, speaking in low, calming tones. "It's all right, Valor. I'm here, just stay calm." But the horse only flared his nostrils and backed away slightly, his muscles tense and ready to spring. Edward could see the subtle signs of anxiety, the twitching tail, the pawing at the ground, the shifting of weight from one hoof to another. He placed his hand gently on Valor's shoulder, trying to steady him, but the stallion's unease only seemed to grow. Edward realized that something serious might happen if he didn't act quickly. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed from the outer paddocks. It was the sound of a gate swinging open abruptly, followed by a series of clanging sounds that echoed through the stables. Valor bolted upright, his ears pinned back, and in a moment of sheer panic he broke free from his stall. The stall door had not been properly latched in the commotion, and now the magnificent horse was running uncontrolled, his hooves pounding against the stone floor and sending splinters of straw flying in every direction. Edward's heart raced. He had to act immediately. "Valor!" "Stop!" Edward shouted, his voice firm but calm, as he ran after the stallion. He dodged loose bales of hay and startled younger horses, all of whom had begun to stir in response to Valor's sudden panic. The royal staff rushed to help, but the scene was chaotic. No one could catch Valor. The stallion's strength and fear gave him a speed and determination that made him almost impossible to restrain. Edward knew that any hesitation could be disastrous. Outside the stables, the problem grew more serious. Valor was headed toward the edge of the estate, where the land dropped off into a steep cliff leading down to the valley below. The beautiful green pastures that had seemed so safe moments ago were now a dangerous slope. Edward's mind raced. He thought of every possible way to stop the horse safely, but there was no time to prepare elaborate measures. He had to rely on his instincts, his training, and the bond he had with Valor. Every second counted. Other guards ran to block the path, waving their arms and shouting, trying to guide the horse away from the cliff. But Valor was too frightened to listen. The stallion galloped with raw power, muscles straining, nostrils flaring, eyes wide with fear. Edward kept close, his movements careful but urgent. He spoke to Valor in a soothing voice, recalling all the times they had trained together, ridden together, and shared quiet moments in the stable. "Valor, listen to me. You're safe. You're not alone," he called, hoping the stallion would recognize his calm authority amid the chaos. Time seemed to stretch as Edward followed Valor closer to the cliff. He could feel the thundering of the horse's hooves in his chest, matching the rapid beat of his own heart. The wind carried the sounds of distant shouts, the cries of staff, and the frantic calls of other horses, but Edward kept his focus entirely on Valor. The moment was critical. A misstep, a slip, or even a sudden panic from the horse could send him over the edge, resulting in a tragedy that no one could bear. Edward knew he had to reach him before it was too late. As he ran, Edward noticed the subtle signs of Valor tiring. The stallion's breathing was heavy, and though he still had incredible speed, there was a hint of hesitation in his stride. Edward seized the opportunity. He positioned himself carefully, keeping pace with Valor, never moving too fast to startle him, yet never too slow to lose control of the situation. Edward had spent years understanding horse behavior, and now that knowledge was the key to saving Valor. In a moment of calculated risk, Edward closed the distance between them. He extended a hand, speaking in low, firm tones, using every ounce of trust he had built over years. "Valor, it's me, Edward. I won't let anything happen to you. Come back to me." Valor's ears twitched, and for a brief second he seemed to recognize the voice he had trusted countless times before. Edward felt a spark of hope, but he knew this was fragile. One wrong move could undo it all. The terrain grew rougher as they approached the cliff. Loose stones, uneven ground, and patches of slippery grass made every step dangerous. Edward had to be extremely careful, yet he could not afford to slow down. Valor's panic was palpable and the horse's movements were unpredictable. Edward had to anticipate every jump, every bolt, every sudden change in direction. His mind worked quickly, calculating angles, distances, and possible ways to guide the stallion to safety. It was a test of courage, skill, and deep understanding of the animal he loved. At the cliff's edge, the danger became immediate. Valor skidded slightly, hooves slipping on the loose earth. Edward lunged forward, grabbing the reins just in time, pulling gently but firmly. The stallion bucked and reared, his fear overwhelming, but Edward held fast. His arms were strong, his stance steady, and his voice calm but commanding. "It's okay, Valor, steady now. Back away from the edge." Slowly, painstakingly, Edward guided the stallion away from the precipice, each movement precise, careful, and deliberate. Other guards watched in awe and fear, uncertain if Edward could manage the situation. Many had faced dangerous circumstances, but few had seen such a delicate balance of trust and courage in action. Edward's focus was absolute, his mind and body working in perfect harmony with the stallion's movements. Every ounce of fear, panic, and adrenaline flowed together in a moment that tested the limits of human and animal cooperation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Edward managed to guide Valor to safer ground, away from the cliff's edge. The stallion's breathing was heavy, but he was safe. Edward knelt beside him, letting the horse catch his breath, gently rubbing his neck and speaking in soothing tones. "You're safe now, old friend. You're safe." Valor nuzzled Edward's hand, a gesture that conveyed trust, relief, and a bond that words could not describe. The crisis was over, but the intensity of the moment lingered in every heartbeat, every breath, and every glance between man and horse. The royal staff rushed to assist, securing the area and checking for any injuries. Valor's panic had caused minor scrapes and bruises, but nothing serious. Edward stood, brushing off dust and dirt, his uniform disheveled, his face flushed with adrenaline. The staff looked at him with admiration and gratitude, realizing the depth of bravery and quick thinking that had prevented a disaster. Edward, however, remained humble, insisting it was all part of his duty and that the stallion's trust made the difference. As the day moved on, Edward took a moment to reflect on what had happened. Valor had been in real danger, and the outcome could have been tragic. Yet, through calmness, courage, and the bond he shared with the horse, Edward had prevented a disaster. He understood that this was more than a rescue. It was a demonstration of the power of patience, understanding, and trust. Each lesson learned in the stables, every quiet moment spent with the animals, had prepared him for this exact challenge. Even as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the estate, Edward remained vigilant. He ensured Valor and the other horses were calm, checking the gates, reinforcing the stalls, and guiding the animals through a gentle, reassuring routine. The adrenaline of the event still coursed through his veins, but he felt a sense of fulfillment and quiet pride. Valor, once panicked, now stood calmly, his ears flicking in acknowledgement of Edward's presence. The bond between them had grown even stronger, tempered by courage and shared experience. Edward knew that the story of this morning would not be forgotten. While the royal family and staff would remember the bravery, Edward understood that the true essence of heroism lay in the quiet moments of trust, patience, and unwavering care. He had faced a situation that demanded immediate action, and through knowledge, instinct, and compassion, he had succeeded. For Edward, that was more important than praise or recognition. It was the affirmation that he had protected a life that depended on him, and in doing so, he had honored the responsibility entrusted to him as a royal guard. The afternoon sun burned brightly over the royal estate, casting long shadows across the stables and the open fields beyond. Edward Hawthorne stood beside Valor, the magnificent stallion whose trust he had spent years earning. Even after the dangerous incident near the cliff, Edward knew the day was far from over. The stallion had calmed, but Edward could still feel a tension in the air, an alertness in Valor's movements that spoke of a lingering fear. Horses rarely forgot a near miss, and Edward understood that patience and careful handling would be crucial in the next hours. Edward led Valor slowly away from the cliff, walking him along a gentle slope toward a safer area of the estate. His hand rested lightly on the horse's neck, soothing him with soft words and gentle strokes. "You're safe now," Edward murmured. "Nothing will hurt you as long as I'm here." Valor's ears flicked back at the sound of Edward's voice, a signal that the horse recognized and trusted. Step by step, Edward guided him to a grassy area near the center of the paddocks, far from the dangers of steep drops or uneven ground. Despite the relative calm, Edward's mind remained sharp. He knew that horses, especially a spirited stallion like Valor, could react unpredictably after a panic. One sudden noise, one startled movement could set off another dangerous run. Edward observed every twitch of the ears, every flick of the tail, every shift in weight. His years of experience as a royal guard, and as someone who deeply cared for the animals, allowed him to anticipate Valor's movements, predicting the stallion's next step before it happened. This attention to detail was what had saved Valor from the cliff moments ago, and now it would help ensure he remained calm. Other staff members gathered nearby, watching silently, unsure whether to intervene. They admired Edward's courage, but more than that, they were amazed at the way he handled the situation with such skill and patience. Edward did not raise his voice unnecessarily or make sudden movements. Instead, he relied on trust and presence. He had learned that fear could be contagious, not only among humans but also among horses. If he stayed calm, Valor would follow, and eventually, the stallion would regain full composure. Edward took a moment to let Valor rest. The stallion's sides heaved with heavy breaths, his muscles trembling slightly from exertion. Edward knelt beside him, brushing dirt and sweat from his coat, whispering reassurances. "It's all right, old friend. You're stronger than you think, and we've got each other." Valor leaned into Edward's touch, nuzzling his shoulder in quiet acknowledgement. For Edward, this small gesture carried immense meaning. It was a silent thank you, a bond solidified by courage, trust, and mutual respect. As Valor calmed further, Edward noticed the staff beginning to regain their composure as well. They moved carefully around the paddocks, checking other horses and securing the gates, ensuring no further incidents could occur. Edward gave clear instructions, guiding them with a steady voice. "Check the other stalls, make sure all the gates are properly latched, and stay calm around the animals. They can sense fear, and we need to remain in control." His authority was firm but gentle, a reflection of his understanding that leadership was not only about giving orders but about providing reassurance. After ensuring the area was secure, Edward turned his attention back to Valor. He had to consider the next step carefully. The horse needed a sense of normalcy to restore confidence, but he also needed to rebuild the trust that might have been shaken by the panic. Edward decided to take Valor for a slow, controlled walk around the estate grounds, allowing the stallion to move freely, but safely, feeling the earth beneath his hooves without fear of danger. Edward's hand rested lightly on Valor's reins, guiding him with subtle shifts in pressure and voice commands that the stallion understood instinctively. As they walked, Edward reflected on the events of the day. Valor's panic had been sudden and dangerous, but it had also revealed the depth of their connection. Edward realized that heroism was not only about facing obvious danger, it was also about understanding, patience, and the ability to act decisively under pressure. The years he had spent learning the nuances of animal behavior, the countless hours in the stables, the quiet care and attention, all of it had prepared him for this moment. Every act of compassion had built the foundation for trust, and that trust had now saved a life. Their slow walk took them past the other horses, who watched silently, Some nickered softly as if acknowledging the event. Edward's calm presence reassured them all. Horses were social creatures. They observed and reacted to the emotions of those around them. By remaining composed, Edward not only kept Valor safe, but also prevented panic from spreading among the other animals. His understanding of this unspoken communication between humans and horses was what set him apart. At the center of the paddocks, Edward led Valor to a familiar spot where the horse liked to graze. The lush green grass swayed gently in the breeze, and the stallion lowered his head to nibble, slowly relaxing his tense muscles. Edward stayed close, letting Valor regain a sense of normalcy while remaining alert. He knew this was a critical moment. He could not allow the horse to revert to fear or panic. With each calm breath and careful step, Valor's trust in Edward was reaffirmed, and Edward's confidence in his own abilities grew stronger. While Valor grazed, Edward noticed a small commotion near the far side of the paddocks. A young foal had gotten tangled in a fence, its tiny legs struggling to free itself. Without hesitation, Edward rushed over, carefully untangling the frightened animal. The foal's cries were loud and piercing, but Edward's gentle approach calmed it quickly. He knelt beside the young horse, murmuring soft words and rubbing its back. "It's all right. I've got you. You're safe now." Once free, the foal nuzzled Edward, echoing the silent gratitude Valor had shown earlier. This incident reminded Edward of the delicate balance he maintained every day. Each horse depended on him not only for safety, but also for guidance, reassurance, and care. The panic with Valor had been dramatic, but even small moments of fear or distress required the same patience and attention. Edward's approach was consistent: remain calm, act decisively, and build trust through understanding and gentle care. These principles had served him well and would continue to do so. By late afternoon, the estate had settled into a quieter rhythm. Valor had regained confidence, walking steadily beside Edward, ears pricked and muscles relaxed. The other horses had returned to grazing or moving peacefully in their paddocks. The royal staff, though still in awe of Edward's bravery, had resumed their duties, now more aware of the careful vigilance required in such a place. Edward took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of relief and quiet pride. He had faced danger directly, and through courage, patience, and knowledge, he had protected the life of a magnificent stallion. Edward knew that this day would remain in his memory forever. The events had tested every skill he possessed: his courage under pressure, his understanding of animal behavior, and his ability to act decisively when lives were at stake. Yet it had also reinforced a truth he had always believed: that true heroism was not measured by recognition or reward, but by the lives protected and the trust earned. Valor's calm presence beside him was proof that Edward had succeeded in this mission, that his actions had made a meaningful difference. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Edward led Valor back toward the stables. The horse moved with quiet grace, muscles no longer tense, breathing steady and eyes alert but calm. Edward's hand rested lightly on his neck, a final gesture of reassurance before returning him to the safety of his stall. He checked the stall carefully, ensuring it was secure and comfortable, and then stood back to observe Valor. The stallion turned his head toward Edward, nostrils flaring slightly, as if to say thank you, a silent acknowledgement of trust and bond that went beyond words. Edward remained in the stable for a few more moments, brushing Valor's coat and speaking softly. He reflected on the lessons of the day, on the importance of patience, vigilance, and compassion. He understood that this was not the end, but part of an ongoing responsibility to protect and care for the animals under his watch. Heroism was not a single act but a continuous practice, a daily choice to act with courage, integrity, and empathy. Today, Edward had proven that he possessed all of these qualities in abundance. As twilight fell, Edward finally stepped away from Valor's stall, allowing the horse to rest. He walked through the stables, ensuring all other horses were calm and secure. The day had been long, filled with tension, fear, and danger, yet Edward's resolve had never wavered. He had faced one of the most frightening situations of his career and emerged successfully, having kept both himself and Valor safe. His bond with the stallion had grown stronger, cemented by shared experience and mutual trust, and Edward knew that this connection would endure, guiding both of them through challenges yet to come. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting warm amber light across the royal estate, a quiet stillness had settled over the stables and paddocks. The intense events of the day were slowly fading into memory, but their impact lingered in the hearts of everyone who had witnessed them. Edward Hawthorne stood beside Valor, the stallion who had caused such a stir earlier but now stood calmly, his coat shining in the soft evening light. The bond between man and horse had grown even stronger through the day's trials, a silent connection built on trust, courage, and shared experience. Edward took a deep breath and looked around the paddocks. The other horses, once nervous and startled by Valor's panic, had returned to their normal routines. Some grazed peacefully, while others moved slowly, enjoying the evening breeze. The royal staff, who had been frantic earlier, were now moving with measured calm, checking gates, doors, and stalls to ensure everything was secure. Even though the immediate danger had passed, Edward remained vigilant. He knew that animals, especially horses, could carry memories of fear for longer than humans often realized. A single sudden noise or unexpected movement could trigger anxiety, so he made sure the environment remained safe and reassuring. Edward turned his attention back to Valor. The stallion's breathing was slow and steady, but his ears flicked occasionally, attentive to every sound. Edward knelt beside him, gently brushing away stray pieces of straw and dirt from his coat. "You've been so brave today," Edward said softly. "I know it wasn't easy, but you trusted me, and that trust kept you safe." Valor nuzzled Edward's shoulder, a gesture that spoke volumes. Horses could not speak human words, but their actions conveyed emotion just as clearly. The stallion's quiet gesture of affection was more meaningful than any praise could be. Edward stood and took a step back, surveying the scene. The royal family had arrived, drawn by the commotion earlier. Their expressions were a mix of relief, admiration, and concern. The youngest prince, eyes wide with awe, looked at Edward and then at Valor. "Did he really almost fall?" the boy asked quietly. Edward nodded, keeping his tone calm. "Yes, Your Highness, but he is safe now. And he will remain safe as long as we are careful." The family exchanged glances, grateful for Edward's quick thinking and courage. The royal veterinarian had arrived as well, moving quickly to examine Valor for any hidden injuries. Edward watched closely, assisting when needed but allowing the professional to take the lead. Every movement was careful, deliberate, and respectful. Valor stood quietly, his trust in Edward allowing the examination to proceed without panic. The vet checked the horse's legs, hooves, and muscles, finding only minor scrapes and bruises from the earlier panic. "He's in excellent condition," the vet said, smiling. "Just a little shaken, but nothing serious." Edward exhaled, feeling a wave of relief. The danger had passed and Valor was truly unharmed. Once the veterinarian had finished, Edward took Valor back to the stables, walking slowly and calmly. He made sure to speak softly, guiding the stallion with gentle pressure on the reins and steady hand on the neck. Valor responded immediately, walking with confidence and purpose. Edward knew that restoring the horse's sense of normalcy was crucial. Horses thrived on routine, and returning Valor to his familiar environment would help solidify his sense of safety. Back in the stall, Edward ensured Valor had fresh water, clean bedding, and enough food to recover from the day's stress. He knelt beside the stallion, brushing him carefully and speaking softly. "You've done so well," Edward said. You were brave and I'm proud of you. Rest now. Tomorrow will be a calmer day. Valor nuzzled Edward's hand once more, then lowered his head to drink water. The stallion's behavior reflected a mixture of relief, trust, and quiet gratitude, a bond between human and animal that had been tested and proven resilient. Edward stepped out of the stall and moved through the stables, checking on the other horses. He spoke to the stable hands, offering guidance and reassurance. Make sure all stalls are secure. Keep the gates closed. Be calm around the animals, they can sense our emotions. His voice was steady, commanding, yet kind. The staff listened attentively, understanding the importance of maintaining calm and order after such a tense day. Every small action mattered in ensuring the safety and well-being of the horses. The royal family gathered in the stables, expressing their gratitude to Edward. "You saved him," the queen said softly, her voice filled with genuine relief. "We cannot thank you enough." Edward bowed respectfully, though he felt no need for praise. "It is my duty to protect all who live here, Your Majesty," he said. "The horse trusted me, and I could not fail him. That trust is what guided me today." His words reflected humility, but also a profound understanding of responsibility. Heroism, Edward believed, was not about recognition. It was about action, duty, and care. Even as the royal family expressed their gratitude, Edward noticed the young prince lingering near Valor, eyes wide with fascination. Edward knelt to the boy's level. "He is a remarkable horse," Edward said. "But remember, Valor is brave because he trusts the people around him. Courage comes from trust and understanding, not just strength." The prince nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson in quiet reflection. Edward smiled. Teaching respect, patience, and empathy, whether to humans or animals, was part of his role, just as important as any act of physical bravery. As evening turned into night, Edward made one last round of the stables. The horses were calm, doors and gates secured, and the staff were beginning to wind down after a long and eventful day. Edward paused for a moment, leaning against a stable door and gazing out across the estate. The paddocks glimmered in the fading light, shadows stretching across the grass. Despite the day's chaos, peace had returned, and Edward felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Valor was safe, the other horses were unharmed, and the royal family could rest without fear. Edward reflected on the events that had unfolded. The panic, the danger, and the uncertainty had all tested his courage and skill. Yet, through it all, he had remained calm, relied on his knowledge and instincts, and acted decisively. The bond he shared with Valor had been critical to the rescue, and it had grown even stronger in the process. Edward understood that such bonds were rare and precious, built over time through patience, understanding, and mutual respect. Today had proven that this bond was more than loyalty, it was life-saving. After ensuring everything was in order, Edward finally took a moment for himself. He walked quietly along the stable corridor, taking in the soft sounds of the horses breathing in their stalls, the distant chirping of evening birds, and the gentle rustle of the trees outside. The calm after the storm was peaceful, almost magical. Edward allowed himself a small smile, knowing that despite the dangers, he had acted with courage, compassion, and skill. Valor's safety was a testament to his dedication and love for the animals he cared for. Before retiring for the evening, Edward returned to Valor's stall one last time. The stallion lay down, resting after the long and stressful day. Edward knelt beside him, gently stroking his mane. "Rest now, my friend," he whispered. "Tomorrow is a new day, and it will be peaceful." Valor's eyes slowly closed, and he let out a soft sigh of contentment, the tension of the day finally leaving him. Edward stood, taking a final glance at the stallion, feeling a quiet pride in knowing that he had done everything possible to protect him. As Edward stepped out of the stables, the night had fully settled over the estate. The stars twinkled above, the moon cast a soft glow over the paddocks, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of hay and fresh grass. The royal estate, once filled with panic and fear, was now calm and serene. Edward walked slowly toward the guardhouse, reflecting on the lessons of the day. Courage, patience, trust, and compassion had all been required, and each had proven vital in saving valor. He understood that heroism was not a single act but a continuous choice, a commitment to act with care, understanding, and bravery whenever the need arose. Edward paused at the guardhouse, looking back at the stables one final time. Valor was safe, the other horses were secure, and the royal family could rest peacefully. Edward knew that today's events would be remembered, not for the danger alone, but for the quiet courage, understanding, and connection that had made the rescue possible. In that moment, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had acted not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. And in doing so, he had strengthened a bond that would last a lifetime between man and horse, courage and trust, duty and compassion. The morning after the dramatic events, the royal estate was calm and serene. The sun rose gently, casting golden light over the wide lawns and the stables where horses grazed peacefully. Edward Hawthorne walked through the paddocks, his steps slow and measured, observing the animals with the same careful attention he always gave them. Valor, the magnificent stallion who had caused so much alarm the day before, stood nearby, his sleek coat shining in the early light. He looked calm, strong, and confident, a reflection of the trust and courage that had carried him through the crisis. Edward smiled quietly. Though the immediate danger was over, he knew that the lessons of yesterday would stay with him and the horses forever. He checked Valor's hooves carefully, feeling the strong muscles under his fingers and making sure there were no lingering injuries. "You're doing well, old friend," Edward said softly. Valor nuzzled his hand, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared. It was more than just trust. It was a partnership built over years of care, understanding, and mutual respect. The royal family arrived in the stables, their faces filled with relief and admiration. They moved quietly, not wanting to startle the horses, and approached Edward with genuine gratitude. "We cannot thank you enough," the Queen said softly. "Your courage saved him, and you saved us from a great tragedy." Edward bowed respectfully, keeping his voice calm and humble. "It was my duty, Your Majesty. Valor trusted me, and I could not fail him. That trust is the foundation of everything I do." The family spent some time observing Valor, who now grazed calmly in the paddocks. They marveled at the stallion's strength and intelligence, understanding that his calm demeanor after yesterday's panic was a result of Edward's careful guidance. The young prince looked up at Edward with wide eyes, clearly fascinated. "Will he be brave again?" the boy asked. Edward knelt to meet him at eye level. "He is already brave," he said. "Bravery comes not from strength alone, but from trust and understanding. Valor trusted me, and that trust helped him face danger with courage." The prince nodded thoughtfully, absorbing the lesson, a quiet moment of learning amid the calm. Edward then turned his attention back to the other horses in the stables. He walked slowly among them, checking their stalls, making sure each one had fresh water, clean bedding, and food. Though the chaos of the previous day had ended, Edward understood that safety was an ongoing responsibility. Horses were sensitive animals, and their well-being depended on constant care and vigilance. He spoke softly to each one, using his voice to reassure them and maintain a calm atmosphere. His presence alone was comforting, a steady hand and a gentle voice that calmed nerves and prevented fear from lingering. By mid-morning, Edward decided it was time to take Valor for a gentle ride. Riding was a way for the stallion to regain confidence fully, to stretch his muscles, and to re-establish routine after the stress of the panic. Edward led Valor out of the stables, the reins held loosely, allowing the horse freedom to move while maintaining guidance. Step by step, they walked through the estate grounds, the familiar paths providing comfort to the stallion. Birds chirped in the trees, the wind rustled gently through the leaves, and the air carried the scent of fresh grass. Every detail of the environment was reassuring, reinforcing Valor's sense of safety. As they moved, Edward spoke to Valor in soft, calm tones. "Take your time, old friend. No need to rush. You're safe and nothing will harm you." Valor responded instantly, walking with measured steps, ears alert but relaxed. Edward's hand rested lightly on the reins, guiding subtly, letting the stallion feel both freedom and security. The bond between them was evident in every movement, every glance. Valor's trust was complete, and Edward's confidence in his own judgment and abilities allowed him to lead without fear or hesitation. The ride took them past the area near the cliff where the previous day's panic had occurred. Edward guided Valor carefully, keeping him on safe paths and speaking reassuring words. The stallion's muscles were strong, and though he had been shaken by the near danger, his spirit was undiminished. Edward reflected on the courage required not only to rescue Valor, but also to help him regain confidence afterward. True heroism, he realized, was not only in the act of saving a life but also in nurturing trust, patience, and resilience afterward. By noon, the royal staff gathered around to express their continued gratitude. They had witnessed Edward's bravery, his calm handling of Valor, and the remarkable bond between man and horse. Many spoke quietly among themselves about how extraordinary it was to see someone act with such courage, skill, and compassion. Edward listened politely, his focus still on Valor, ensuring the stallion remained calm and secure. Praise was welcome, but his attention was on maintaining the animal's safety and well-being. The veterinarian returned to examine Valor again, making sure no hidden injuries had developed overnight. Edward assisted, guiding the stallion and ensuring he remained calm during the process. Valor stood quietly, confident in Edward's presence, and allowed the examination to proceed smoothly. The vet smiled, impressed by both the horse's calm demeanor and Edward's skill in maintaining control. "He is perfectly healthy," the veterinarian said. "A little shaken yesterday, but nothing more. You have done an excellent job." Edward nodded, feeling satisfaction, not from praise, but from knowing that Valor was truly safe and thriving. As the day wore on, Edward led Valor back to the paddocks, letting him graze and move freely. Other horses approached, curious about the stallion's calm behavior. Edward observed quietly, letting Valor demonstrate that danger had passed and that life could return to normal. The other animals followed the example, relaxing and returning to their routines. Edward knew that a single act of courage could influence more than one life. It could restore peace to the entire environment. His actions had not only saved Valor but had helped maintain calm and trust among all the horses. By late afternoon, Edward reflected on the significance of the events. The panic and danger had tested his courage, his skills, and his understanding of the animals he cared for. Yet through careful attention, calm judgment, and deep trust, he had navigated every challenge successfully. Edward understood that heroism was not about recognition, but about responsibility, action, and the bonds built over time. Every small act of care, every moment of patience, had contributed to the outcome. The day's events had reinforced a simple truth: true courage was guided by trust and compassion. Edward returned to the stables as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Valor followed calmly, walking beside him with quiet dignity. Edward checked the stall once more, making sure it was secure, clean, and comfortable. He knelt beside Valor, brushing his mane and whispering softly, "Rest now, old friend. Tomorrow will be peaceful. You are safe, and we will continue to look after each other." Valor leaned into Edward's hand, eyes soft and trusting, and let out a gentle sigh, the tension of the past 2 days finally melting away. The royal family visited again that evening, offering thanks and admiration. Edward spoke humbly, emphasizing the trust between him and Valor rather than his own bravery. "Valor trusted me, and that trust guided every decision I made," Edward explained. "Without it, none of this would have been possible." True courage comes from understanding and respect, not just action. The family nodded, recognizing the depth of wisdom in Edward's words. His actions had not only saved a life but had also demonstrated a lesson in patience, empathy, and leadership. As night fell, Edward made one final round of the stables. The horses were calm, doors securely latched, and the staff were winding down after the long and eventful day. He paused in the center of the paddocks, looking out at the peaceful scene. The moonlight reflected off the glossy coats of the horses. The gentle breeze carried the scent of hay and grass, and all was quiet except for the soft sounds of animals breathing in their stalls. Edward felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had faced danger directly, guided by trust and understanding, and emerged successfully. The bond between him and Valor had been strengthened, and a new sense of peace had settled over the estate. Edward knew that this day would be remembered for a long time. The story of Valor's panic, the near disaster at the cliff, and the calm bravery of the royal guard would be told again and again. It was a story of courage, patience, and trust, a tale that illustrated how understanding and empathy could save lives. Edward realized that heroism was not always about grand gestures. It could also be quiet, steady, and thoughtful. Protecting the animals, guiding them with patience, and building trust were acts of heroism in their own right. As Edward finally stepped away from the stables for the night, he took a moment to look back. Valor was safe, the other horses were calm, and the royal family could rest without fear. The events of the past 2 days had tested everyone's courage and resolve, but they had also shown the strength of trust and compassion. Edward felt a quiet pride, not in recognition or reward, but in knowing he had done what was right. The bond between him and Valor would endure, a lasting reminder that courage guided by trust and care could overcome even the greatest challenges. The stars twinkled above the estate, the moon casting a gentle glow over the stables and paddocks. Edward walked slowly to the guardhouse, reflecting on the lessons of the day. He understood that his actions had not only saved a life but had inspired others, staff, royal family, and even the young prince, to recognize the value of trust, patience, and courage. Heroism, Edward knew, was a quiet strength, a commitment to act with care and understanding whenever needed. And in that quiet strength he had found his greatest fulfillment.